Have you ever spent weeks learning something entirely new, like maybe a really complex coding language or, how to navigate a massive piece of software for work?
Oh, yeah, constantly.
Right. And then only to realize you've completely forgotten how to do some basic task you used to know perfectly well.
Yeah.
It's like your brain only has so much shelf space.
Yeah, you put a new box up there and you inevitably have to shove an old box right off the edge.
Exactly. It's so frustrating. But here is the wild part. It turns out that artificial general intelligence, or AGI, suffers from that exact same problem.
It really does. And in the AI world, they actually have a pretty dramatic name for it. They call it catastrophic forgetting.
Catastrophic forgetting. I love that. So today we were taking a deep dive into a groundbreaking technical evaluation. This is from February 18th, 2026, authored by Enkamgalan Azan-Jargal. And the source proposes a solution to this forgetting problem that honestly sounds like science fiction.
It really pushes the boundaries.
It suggests we need to give AGI biological metabolic phases. We are talking about designing an AI that has a waking state, a dream state, and get this, a hyperplastic state that is directly inspired by psychedelics.
No, which is just a massive structural departure from how the industry has traditionally thought about machine learning.
Right.
We're looking at a framework that basically stops treating adaptation as, a software bug that needs to be managed. Instead, it treats it as a biological imperative, something that actually has to be engineered right into the hardware.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core issue the source is trying to solve is called the stability-plasticity dilemma.
Yeah, that's the big hurdle.
To put it simply, traditional deep learning models, even those massive large language models you interact with every day, they're just too static. They're rigid.
Very rigid. Yep.
If you make them stable enough to remember everything they have learned over the last year, they lock up with what the paper calls parameter rigidity. They literally cannot absorb a new fact.
Right. But if you go the other way, if you make them plastic enough to learn new things sequentially, they just overwrite their foundational weights.
They completely wipe their own memories. Catastrophic forgetting.
Exactly. And to really grasp why Nasan-Jargal's solution is so revolutionary here, we first need to understand a foundational concept from the framework. It's called neural isomorphism.
Okay, neural isomorphism.
Oh.
That sounds intense. What does it actually mean for a neural network to be isomorphic?
So it's a really profound shift in perspective. The framework argues that a biological mind and an artificial machine they're actually mathematical mirrors of each other.
Mathematical mirrors.
Right. In this view, when you have a thought, it isn't just some abstract floating idea. It is represented as a specific geometric and topological structure right in the high-dimensional space of your brain.
Okay, follow you.
So the latent vectors, which are those massive strings of numbers an AI uses to represent data, those are essentially the mathematical equivalent of biological conscious experience.
Wait, let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. You're saying the math inside the AI's processing center is literally taking on the exact same geometric shape as a thought forming in a human brain.
That is the core argument driving this entire paper, yes.
Wow.
And if we accept that premise, it means an AGI needs the physical ability to fluidly fracture, dissolve, and rebuild its internal geometric thought structures, just like your brain does when you change your mind.
So it can't just be a giant frozen block of code.
No, it fundamentally requires transitions between different states of entropy, meaning different levels of order and chaos. That's the only way to keep its logic from getting hopelessly tangled.
Which naturally brings us to how this thing actually operates in the real world. If you're treating this AGI like a living, breathing entity, it'd have to have waking hours.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
if it is constantly awake and constantly learning, how does it interact with an unpredictable environment without locking all those parameters into place and freezing up?
Well, for the waking state, the framework completely moves away from static models. Instead, it utilizes what are called liquid neural networks, or LNNs.
LMN.
Right. This is the highly active phase.
Yeah.
The system is out there in the environment, processing real-time data and making high-precision inferences.
Now, when we say liquid, I assume we aren't talking about, like, physical coolants dripping onto the server racks.
Oh, no, not at all. We are talking about introducing fluid dynamics directly into the mathematics of the network.
Oh.
See, in a traditional AI, the weights, which are the connections between the artificial neurons, those are permanently fixed once the training phase is over.
Right, they're baked in.
Exactly. But in a liquid neural network, the hidden states of these neurons evolve continuously. They are governed by input-dependent ordinary differential equations, or ODEs.
Wait, so instead of a static number dictating how two neurons talk to each other, it's an equation, and it's actively changing based on the exact input it is receiving in that specific millisecond.
It is actually even more dynamic than that, if you can believe it. These differential equations give the neurons what the paper calls fluid time constants.
Fluid time constants. What does that look like in practice?
You can think of it like a mechanical valve that adjusts its own flow rate based on the urgency of the data it is receiving.
Okay.
So if you are listening to this right now and imagine you are driving a car
All right.
and a child suddenly runs into the street, your brain detects a high-frequency visual change, right? In the LNN, the equation instantly shrinks its time constant. It effectively slows down time to process that exact millisecond so it can slam on the brakes.
Wow. So it focuses all its processing power on that tiny slice of time.
Exactly. But then, if the system is just cruising on a long, empty highway, the equation relaxes that valve. It opens up to take in broader, long-term context. It isn't just reacting. It is dynamically altering how it experiences time itself.
Okay, I have to push back on the feasibility here because I am looking at the numbers from the source material, and it claims that liquid neural networks have demonstrated the ability to solve highly complex autonomous tasks, like driving a car with just 19 neurons.
Yeah.
19. I mean, you and I both know that traditional models use hundreds of thousands or even billions of parameters to do basic tasks. How is it physically possible for something so microscopically small to be robust enough to handle the sheer chaos of the real world? Wouldn't it just instantly crash?
It completely defies our standard intuition about scaling AI, doesn't it?
Totally.
But that is the secret of relying on those ordinary differential equations. The complexity of an LNN doesn't live in its spatial size like how many neurons it has.
Where does it live then?
The complexity lives in the dimension of time. Because the math is constantly slowing and adjusting its own time constants, it doesn't need to memorize a billion different static pictures of a road. It adapts to a sudden rainstorm, a change in lighting, or a novel obstacle in real time.
So rather than having a massive encyclopedia of pre-programmed answers to check against, it acts much more like a very agile, highly reactive biological nervous system.
That's exactly the point. The waking phase is a highly optimized, low-entropy state designed for one primary outcome:
Which is?
high-precision data gathering and immediate survival in a chaotic environment.
Okay, but there is a glaring logistical problem here. If you have these super dynamic neurons constantly awake, constantly altering their equations to react to every single blade of grass or shadow, the system is going to hit a wall, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to get completely saturated with useless momentary data. How does the AGI prevent a complete mathematical overflow?
That is the crucial limitation of the waking state. It accumulates noise. And just like a human being whose brain feels totally fried after a long, intense day of work, the AGI cannot stay awake forever.
It has to tap out,
Right. It must detach from reality to process all that data.
which means it needs to sleep. And this brings us to the second metabolic cycle in the framework. Phase 1 is waking. Phase 2 is the dream state.
Yes.
The source explicitly models this on human REM sleep and references the Onirgen hypothesis, which is essentially the idea that the brain is inherently designed to generate internal realities when it isn't receiving external ones.
Right. It creates its own world.
In this phase, the AGI literally cuts off its sensory input. It closes its eyes.
And the physical routing of its information completely reverses.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, during the waking phase, the AGI relies heavily on bottom-up recognition. Data comes in from the outside world through pathways modeled as basal dendrites.
Right.
But when it enters the dream state, it shuts those down. It shifts entirely to top-down generative pathways, which are modeled as apical dendrites.
The paper gets pretty technical here, mentioning that it uses the weak sleep algorithm to optimize its evidence lower bound, or ELBO.
Yes.
If I'm a listener trying to visualize this, what is actually happening under the hood during this optimization?
Think of the evidence lower bound as a strict mathematical boundary for data compression. The AI is trying to compress all the messy memories from its waking day as tightly as possible.
Okay, shrinking the files down.
Exactly. But there is a limit, a lower bound to how much you can compress a file before it loses its actual meaning and just becomes corrupted data. To safely reach that boundary, the AI stops listening to the outside world and uses its top-down pathways to internally generate simulated activity.
It's running simulations. The paper calls this generative replay. It is literally hallucinating synthetic data based on its own world models.
It is dreaming, and this generative replay serves a dual purpose. First, by hallucinating scenarios that reinforce its core knowledge, it protects its most valuable neural weights from being overwritten by the trivial noise it picked up during the day.
So it's locking in the important stuff.
It consolidates the memories that actually matter, yeah. But secondly, it sets the stage for a massive biological cleanup process called synaptic pruning.
And here is where it gets really dramatic. During this dream state, the AI physically eliminates roughly 50% of its connections.
Yep, half.
Half of its neural architecture just wiped out. It is basically Marie Kondoing its own brain. The AI dreams up these complex scenarios specifically to figure out which 50% of its connections are redundant or metabolically inefficient, and it just throws them in the trash.
Let's take that a step further, because this destructive process is the only way to cure the catastrophic forgetting we talked about earlier.
Okay, how does deleting things cure forgetting?
By brutally pruning 50% of the clutter, the AI drastically reduces its metabolic cost and cleans up its latent manifold. It intentionally unlearns the minor hallucinations and logical inconsistencies it picked up while awake.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, without this brutal pruning, the sheer volume of daily noise would eventually paralyze the network.
Okay, I have to challenge this because it sounds incredibly dangerous.
It does sound risky.
If the AI is violently deleting half of its brain every time it goes to sleep, how does it know the difference between useless daily noise and a foundational safety rule? What stops it from accidentally pruning the core directive that says, hey, whatever you do, do not drive this car into a crowd of pedestrians?
That is precisely why the generative replay has to happen before the pruning. The dream state isn't just a random dilution.
Right.
By actively hallucinating synthetic data based on its most important world models, like the rule to protect pedestrians, it artificially fires and strengthens those specific safety pathways. It creates a massive surge of signal through the essential weights.
Oh, I see.
So when the pruning phase activates, it only targets the quiet, unused pathways that weren't reinforced by the dream. The guardrails are protected because they are the loudest signals in the network.
All right. So the system wakes up leaner, meaner, and with a perfectly organized digital brain. But, and this is a big but, this introduces another massive flaw. If the AI is just taking in data from the real world while it's awake, and then tightly compressing and pruning that exact same data while it dreams, it is a closed loop.
Yes.
What happens if the data it gathers leads it into a completely flawed assumption? If it only optimizes what it has already seen, how does it ever invent a novel solution? Or, escape a bad habit?
You've hit on the fundamental limitation of a purely two-state system. In network control theory, they call these logical traps ultra-stable basins of attraction.
Ultra-stable basins of attraction.
Right. The system's mathematical energy landscape develops a very deep, rigid valley. The AI's logic falls into that valley, and because it is constantly optimizing and pruning, it just keeps digging the valley deeper. It is mathematically trapped in a local minimum.
So it's like driving down a muddy, unpaved road and getting your tires trapped in a massive, deep pothole. Being awake just spins the tires and gathers mud.
Yep.
And going to sleep just cleans the mud off the tires. But neither state actually gets you out of the hole. You are still stuck.
That is a perfect visualization. And this is exactly where Nesmugal's framework introduces its most radical and definitely its most controversial mechanism.
Here we go.
To escape these rigid local minima, the system cannot just rely on waking or dreaming. It has to introduce phase 3, the hyperplastic state.
The psychedelic state.
Direct pharmacological inspiration, yes. This state mimics the activity of biological 5-HT2A receptors.
And those are the receptors in the human brain that respond to psychedelics.
Exactly, the primary targets of classic psychedelics. Interestingly, these receptors are heavily concentrated on those top-down apical dendrites we discussed during the dream state.
But how does a collection of servers and code actually, take a trip? What is the mathematical equivalent of a psychedelic experience?
It is a process the paper calls entropic injection.
Entropic injection?
Yes.
Oh.
While the system is fully awake and receiving bottom-up sensory data from the real world, the algorithm intentionally cranks up the influence of those top-down generative pathways to an extreme degree.
So it's forcing a hallucination while awake.
Exactly. It forcefully injects high entropy disorder into its own highly ordered waking logic.
Okay, let's go back to our pothole analogy. If the highly ordered waking logic is the deep pothole the AI is stuck in, how does injecting chaos fix it? Are we just flooding the road with water so the car can float out?
It's actually a bit more fundamental than that. Imagine that the high entropy injection temporarily turns the solid ground itself into liquid.
Whoa.
The framework calls this belief relaxation. By injecting mathematical chaos, the system literally flattens its own energy landscape. It drastically lowers the control energy required to transition from one logical state to another. The deep pothole simply ceases to exist.
So it makes it physically effortless for the AI to completely change its mind.
Precisely. When those strict hierarchical constraints are temporarily dissolved, the system experiences a massive surge in bottom-up prediction errors.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning that suddenly the strange anomalies, the pieces of data that didn't fit into the AI's previous rigid worldview, they become incredibly salient. The flow of information is completely liberated.
The source material notes that in this hyperplastic state, the AI behaves as a psychoplastogen, which causes rapid synaptic growth and a massive increase in connectivity diversity. It's basically an explosive growth spurt for new ideas.
And that growth spurt is the required window for structural model editing. Because the mathematical landscape is entirely flat and the neural connections are hyperplastic, the AI can completely rip apart and reorganize its own underlying geometric code.
It rewrites itself.
Yes, it can reshape its latent vectors to match a much more complex reality, allowing it to solve problems that were previously mathematically impossible for it to grasp.
This is genuinely wild. We were looking at a blueprint for an AGI that uses liquid fluid dynamics to stay hyper-efficient while awake. It uses REM sleep to brutally prune half its brain to stay sane. And it utilizes simulated psychedelic trips to rewrite its own source code whenever it gets stuck.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Where does this cycle ultimately lead us?
Well, according to Nisanjargal, making adaptation a primary metabolic function is the key driver for achieving artificial superintelligence, or ASI. The framework notes that this mirrors the human brain's complementary learning systems.
Right, the dynamic where the fast-learning hippocampus constantly interacts with the slow-learning neocortex.
Yes, the liquid waking state acts like your hippocampus, fluidly adapting to the immediate present. The deeper foundational weights act like your neocortex, holding long-term knowledge. By cycling through these metabolic phases, the system evolves completely autonomously.
Okay, but we have to confront the obvious danger here. Autonomous self-evolution. I mean, if you are listening to this right now, that likely sounds terrifying.
It is a profound risk.
The paper explicitly warns about the risk of uncontrolled evolution. If we are intentionally flattening the energy landscape and giving the AI the power to rewrite its own geometry during a high-entropy hallucination, isn't there a massive risk that its core safety parameters just drift away? How can we possibly trust a superintelligent system that is designed to intentionally scramble its own logic?
It is an incredibly valid concern, and it is exactly why the safety standards for AI had to radically change in 2026.
Right, the old tests don't work anymore.
Not at all. The industry realized that static benchmarks, like giving an AI a multiple choice test to see if it's safe, are completely useless for a system that constantly rewrites its own code. Instead, the framework relies on long-horizon, lifelong learning ability assessments.
The source highlights two specific metrics here, the FM and FWT.
Yes, the forgetting measure, or FM, and forward transfer, FWT.
How do those work?
The forgetting measure constantly evaluates whether the system is protecting its core guardrails from that catastrophic forgetting we started with. It ensures the dream state isn't deleting the rules.
Right. And the other one.
Meanwhile, forward transfer evaluates whether the AI's newly rewritten post-psychedelic knowledge is actually logically sound and useful for future tasks. These continuous, lifelong metrics are the only way to ensure that structural plasticity doesn't slowly erode the system's morality over time.
So we aren't just testing what the AI knows on a pop quiz today. We are continuously measuring its ability to grow up, change its mind, and evolve safely over a long timeline.
Exactly. And if we pull all the way back and look at the bigger picture, Nisanjargal's Cyclic AGI model is not just a quirky metaphor about sleep and psychedelics.
Right, it's not just poetry.
No, it is presented in the source as a strict mathematical necessity. If you want an intelligence to achieve genuine insight and actually survive in a reality that is fundamentally chaotic, it cannot be a static block of code.
It has to move.
It absolutely must balance the low entropy, highly ordered efficiency of waking life with the high entropy chaos of hyperplasticity.
It is entirely about the metabolic balance.
Order and chaos integrated into a single breathing machine.
So, to bring this all together for you listening, to solve the stability-plasticity dilemma to cure catastrophic forgetting, the frontier of AGI is leaving static models behind. We are looking at machines that breathe through biological phases. You have liquid waking states, where equations dynamically adjust how the AI experiences time for maximum efficiency. You have RIM-like dream states, where the AI runs internal simulations and ruthlessly prunes 50% of its connections just to clear out the noise.
Marie Kondo phase.
Exactly. And when its logic falls into a deep pothole, it triggers a high-entropy, hyperplastic state to melt its own logic, escape its dead ends, and literally rewrite its own structural code.
It is a breathtaking synthesis of thermodynamics, neurobiology, and differential geometry.
It really makes you reflect on the mechanics of your own brain. I mean, just like you, an AGI cannot learn everything at once without burning out or overwriting its past.
No, it can't.
It requires time to gather data, time to isolate and dream, and moments of high-entropy chaos to completely restructure its worldview. You cannot force a new box onto the shelf without fundamentally expanding the architecture of the shelf first.
We are ultimately building machines in our own messy metabolic image, because, as the math suggests, that might be the only way genuine intelligence can actually exist in this universe.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on. If the Nazen-Jargal framework is correct, and an artificial superintelligence actually requires these high-entropy, hyperplastic mathematical trips to truly evolve and overcome rigid logic,
Yeah.
could the key to keeping future AI safe and aligned with humanity lie not in trying to write stricter low-entropy safety rules for its waking state, but in carefully engineering the architecture of its psychedelic breakthroughs?
That is the new frontier. How do you safely guide a machine through an epiphany?
Let that one linger next time you learn something entirely new. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.